All right, let's go ahead and get started.
Okay, let's.
I'm switching glasses back and forth. Late in the day, my eyes are tired. This is really exciting. I want to thank for the invitation, and thank for those who want to study. It's been on the list of study topics, and it is broader than Ezra-Nechemiah for a long time, because the question of what makes Judaism Jewish, or what makes Jews Jewish, or where the Jews really come from, is a fascinating question. And in terms of the things that we actually do, it's the rabbinic period. It's the classic rabbinic period in terms of our understanding of Judaism, unequivocally. But how they got there is a serious and a complicated issue. And then it depends on who you ask. A number of years ago, Risa Levitt-Cohen, member of the Shul, chair of the Religious Studies Department at State, and a colleague of hers, then the chair of the department, Rebecca Moore, wrote this book on the first century of the Common Era. And they argue that really Judaism and Christianity, as we think of them, began in the first century of the Common Era, so to speak. So it's a neat argument. And then there's Karen Carpenter. Right? Was she also a musician?
She was a singer.
Yeah, and I think that is the scholar's name. Maybe it's Karen Armstrong. That's why I always say Karen Carpenter, and I know I'm wrong, but I have to get there. Karen Armstrong wrote a book called The Great Transformation, I think, where she argues earlier in the second into the first century of the Common Era, before the Common Era, second into the first century before the Common Era, is this time of great radical innovation, not just in the land of Israel, but in other places as well. And she talks about really the end of the Greek Empire and what that means for the spread of Hellenism and in the Far East. Kind of when I moved my clock backwards, as somebody who was trained to think that the rabbinic period really created our Judaism. I know we go back to the early rabbinic stuff for fun, but not so much. And then Karen Armstrong helped me to really appreciate the ways in which really the Maccabees in the second century before the Common Era revolt against the Greeks is really defining in a whole variety of ways. And I've mined that, and there's more to be done there, and so forth. And if we come to read the book of Daniel, that's really the context for the book of Daniel, and neat stuff. And the book of Daniel, as much as it purports to be a Babylonian book, is really a Persian book. And it came up as well. It comes up relevant to Job, comes up relevant to a lot of late biblical writings that don't owe much to Greeks, and people try to make arguments about how they reflect Greek thinking, but they're not linguistically Greek. And all of the Aramaic that we experience comes in through the Persian Empire. It doesn't come in through Greece. And the style of thinking through Zoroastrianism clearly comes in not through the Greeks, but through the Persian Empire. And I know very little about the Persian Empire. Basic outlines of history and some names of some kings, and the seal of Cyrus. And that the thing that's really exciting now, to go backwards to then come forward again, is to understand really the Persian period, which is almost all of Second Temple times, is the Persian period. And it's the Persians who let us, whoever we are, come back from Babylon and build the Second Temple, and we serve underneath, a kind of Persian vassalage. There's also a period where we're under the Ptolemies from Egypt, and the tension between the end of the sort of southeastern part of the Greek Empire and the Persian Empire. Anyway, but the way in which Persian thinking comes into the Bible, and to really get there, we have to sort of leapfrog it and go to the beginning of the Persian period. So that's kind of the background, the real sort of switch that turned it on was the last chapter of Joshua, which I enjoyed being invited to, and using that as an opportunity to ask what comes next and to get really excited, I think. I have in the last couple of weeks either learned more or just gotten more confused about this book than ever before. I've been teaching it for years, mostly in non-Jewish settings, and it gets its It usually only gets a third of a lecture period because it's part of the post-exilic world, and then it's about Esther and Daniel, and then Job gets its own separate place. And it's remarkable how little consensus there is on almost every major issue in Ezra-Nechemiah. And so some of it is pretty straightforward. The book itself is traditionally Jewishly one book. Hi, Jim. It's traditionally Jewishly one book that gets split. It actually gets translated into Greek. We have that Greek book. It's called Second Esdras. Esdras. And it's part of the Apocrypha. And it's really neat because the form of the book there is different than we have it. There's also a First Esdras, which is another version, and that's interesting and worth talking about after we study Ezra-Nechemiah. And there's not a clear, and pretty much everything that we're going to talk about is, it's not only that it's open for scholarly debate, because everything's open for scholarly debate, but there really isn't a consensus about it. And I hope to bring some of that in as we read through it, because what we're going to do is we're going to read through it, and that's what we want to do and do it. But we want to contextualize it, and that's going to be part of the confusion, though it's fascinating for what is there. This was commented on Wednesday. We are experimenting. We're not doing anything at the moment, but we're experimenting with what it might mean to record classes and so forth. So that's a different conversation.
Can I ask you one thing about it? Because it's the context of the whole thing. When Cyrus offers for them to go back, relatively small number goes back, I guess, at 40-some thousand he talked about a year. So many stayed where they were. Now, just as a general question, I know the Jews who were in Babylonia had a very rich Jewish life there in Babylonia too. So right? When was this contextually, or in the Talmud, it's called the Babylonian Talmud. When is that?
Good. So we don't know how many left. We have biblical accounts, plural. We don't know how many come back.
Left, you mean from Jerusalem?
Left from Jerusalem to Babylon. They come back in stages, and the temple even gets built in stages, and we'll see that as we read through the book, and we'll see the accountings that are here, and we'll try and make sense of the numbers that are here. To answer your question, which is going to not be about Ezra-Nechemiah, because Ezra-Nechemiah is about those who come back, but however many were ever there, those who remain in Babylon are the seeds for what will be the most significant Jewish community from sometime in the 3rd, maybe the 4th century, all the way up for a long, long time. And there will be other centers that develop as well. Other parts of the southern Islamic world, the Iberian Peninsula, southern Spain is going to be really important. There are other old and very important communities. But the Jewish community of Babylon, which will leave one of the greatest marks on the Jewish world in the Babylonian Talmud, and I'll come to the dating of that in a second, remains a vibrant Jewish community for probably 1,000 years. And one of these centers, if not at times the most dominant, and more than that.
More than that.
Correct. So
you can trace the end of that
into the 20th
1948.
century. Correct.
Yeah. And
So-
they started way before.
Correct. But by the
more than
time
1,000 years.
I'll make the argument, and it's not for this class, that by the time, even by the time we get into the Middle Ages, that there are already really dominant centers that rival Babylon. So up through, say, the 10th century, by the time that the land of Israel, by the 2nd century forward, maybe the 3rd century forward in terms of the development of the Galilean community, Babylon is the dominant Jewish community, and the Jewish world from everywhere looks towards it and continues to look towards it, and that begins to change, not because Babylon goes down in importance, but there are other centers that become important. The community in Spain, the community in Provence, the Italian community will be important, and then by the time we get into the end of the 15th, into the 16th century, we're going to be, the land of Israel again is really, really relevant and important. And then you get centers in Eastern Europe, by the time we move into the late Renaissance, Lithuania, Hungary, and so forth. So Babylon stays important and vibrant up until the middle of the 20th century, but is the single most important Jewish city for about 1,000 years. I would say pretty, from the 3rd century, so maybe only till the 11th century, a little less than 1,000 years.
So you say 3rd century CE.
3rd century of the Common Era. Correct. But it's already a very old community, right? Yeah. Because its origins are in the 6th century before the Common Era. And it's really the beginning of diaspora Judaism. And then it will be with Alexander, through Alexander, and really through the Romans, that we will get a real development of Jews in other places, right? The Ptolemies. So Alexander dies in 330 something, I think, before the Common Era.
333. So 333 was when he conquered Jerusalem.
Okay, so
he died not
late
very
4th century before the Common Era is when Alex isn't so great anymore.
Yeah.
And so you start to get the dissolution. You get a period of time where the empire is set. But then you get the rise of the Ptolemies in Egypt. Again, Egypt becomes a major influence, distinct from the Greeks, the Hellenic. And they will play an important influence in the Alexandrian community. It's a critically important community for a long time as well, the Egyptian community in general. But Babylon will be dominant, so much so that as things go, I don't know if it's as things go south, but as the Roman Empire goes papal, the Jewish community in the land of Israel becomes less significant through the Bar Kokhba revolt, but then that really, all the way through the era of the Mishnah, at some point, the people argue about when the transition really moves, and we see that tension in the Babylonian Talmud, where we see the tension about travelers who go from one place to the other, and are they treated? Who's treated like a noble visitor, and who's treated like somebody in from the sticks? It's interesting. The Talmud itself, the content of the Talmud is probably finished in the 4th century. The editing of the Talmud was completed somewhere into the 7th or 8th century, Babylonian Talmud. Somewhere in the 7th or 8th century. It's a period of time that, every couple of years, somebody else makes an argument that makes it later and later and later. It's one of the greatest literary achievements of our people. And it's hard to imagine that somehow it took hundreds of years and they ended up with one version. I would think that over a process they would end up with many versions, but whatever it is, by the 7th or 8th century we have a Babylonian Talmud that's definitive. But then we have a series of leaders in the Babylonian community, the Geonim, and just as one of my favorite examples, and somebody on their phone, I don't always do dates so well, but the first great non-biblical philosophical work, no disrespect to Pirkei Avot for those on Wednesday mornings, is a book by Saji Gaon. So Gaon, which we normally translate as genius, but it's a title like like president or king or chief justice or whatever the right title would be. That the Geonate, right, the Geonim, the institution of it rules the Jewish community of Babylon and is really the titular head of the Jewish world for centuries. The Reish Galuta, the head of the Gullus, as they say. The head of the diaspora. So Saja.
He was because they were
8th or 9th
My
century.
son who was murdered, his middle name was Saja.
It's one of the great sage names.
But it's that lineage was of the Davidic.
Correct.
Davidic line.
Correct. They are by heredity, they are descendants of David. But Saja pens a book called Sefer Deot Ve'emunot, which normally gets translated as something like the book of knowledge and opinions, or I don't know, something along those lines, but which is considered one of the only, and certainly the first, sort of philosophical work of a Jew. There are very few. It's not the kind of writing that Jews engaged in. There's Saja, there are certainly Maimonides, a few others that will get thrown in there. And that'll take us up to the modern period. But as an example, the Gaon after Saja, I think, Rab Amram, or Amram Gaon, writes the first prayer book. And most of the argumentation about what prayers we say and so forth are in the Babylonian Talmud, but we don't get the final resolution of the question. We get 2 or 3 opinions and argumentations, and then that goes into some digression or whatever else. But
Are you interested in that date?
For Saja, sure.
For Saja Gaon, born
8th century.
882.
9th century.
9th century, 882,
So late.
died 942.
Good, and you can double check. Maybe Amram's right before Saja then.
Amram?
Amram. Amram Gaon.
Yeah, thank you.
Approximately when, I think I know, but that doesn't count. Anyway, when did they go to Babylon, and exactly when did the majority of them return?
Good, I'll answer the first part.
Okay.
In 586 or 587, it's interesting to see who reports which year. The Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar or Nebuchadrezzar,
Before BC.
BCE?
BCE, thank you, destroyed the temple,
First.
the first temple, and carried the nobility and the treasures off to Babylon. And we're going to start in 537 with the Edict of Cyrus, which allows them to go back. And we're going to start with, we'll see where it goes from there, the account in the book of Ezra about what happened and what it looked like. And we want to do, it's a biblical class, it's not a history class, but we want to inform it. But to finish the Rav Amram, in terms of the centrality of the Babylonian community, besides giving us
537 they went back.
537, the first
Is
one,
when
they're
they're
given
allowed to
permission.
come back.
50
Correct.
years
Doesn't mean
later.
they
50
came
years
back.
later.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to read.
I don't know, I had 70 years. Or
So
something.
70 is the magic number, the way it's remembered in the tradition.
And
when
that's
you
what
talk
Yirmiyahu
about that.
tells them.
Yeah,
And that's what Jeremiah talks
it's-
about.
Jeremiah predicted it will be 70
70
years.
years.
Correct,
Oh,
and that
that's
will be
where I got
relevant
that.
again after the second destruction. But I want to finish my whole thought about the centrality of Babylon. Babylon gives us the Babylonian Talmud, or the Babylonian Jews give us the Babylonian Talmud, the single most set of books, but the definitive Jewish literature for the past 16 centuries, give or take 15 centuries, give or take, by which our Jewish life. When rabbis are asked questions, they don't go to the Tanakh, they go to the Talmud. But let me finish. Another contribution of the Babylonian community, say to Rav Amram, is Amram gets, because that's the role of the Geonate, Amram gets a question from the Alexandria community having to do with a specific prayer, and it's a singular question. It's like, Rabbi, when the first night of Rosh Hashanah is a Friday night, what do you do for Havdalah on Saturday night, because it's between the first and second, and so forth? It was a very specific technical question, and Amram, in response to this Alexandrian question, because the community must have had a, do we sit or stand for the Shema kind of moment about this detail, writes the prayer book. And it's sort of like...
Rambam with the Geret Teiman.
Correct. And
You ask a question, you get an answer
Correct.
from a rabbi.
And it has the same kind of arrogant thing, like, stop asking me silly questions. Here's the answer to all your prayer questions. Don't ask me anymore. But it's the first, to our knowledge,
Do we all
historically,
get
Yes,
one
they
of
do.
those books?
all of the
Don't
prayer
have to
books,
ask you
yes.
any questions?
Yes, but those are the prayer books, not this book. I'll mention this book also in a minute. But to our knowledge, that's the first, what we call a Siddur. Right? Whatever people prayed from, clearly not everybody had their own books, and people, the world functioned very
And it
differently.
was much shorter,
What's that?
Shorter than what?
much shorter than what we have.
Depends on who's leading the davening, I think. But that's another contribution of the Babylonian community. So the centrality of the Babylonian community, and the Babylonian community, even more so than those who came back, is really a Persian community. So we call it Babel because that's the name of the place, and that's how we refer to the community and so forth. But the Neo-Babylonian Empire, not the old Mesopotamian ancient. I mean, you guys are still ancient, but the 6th century Babylonian Empire is very short-lived. They actually have many kings because after Nebuchadnezzar, it's like everybody serves for 6 months and then gets assassinated. So they stuff a whole bunch of kings into a relatively short period of time. But the Neo-Babylonian Empire in the 6th century, before the Common Era, has a very short moment of the world stage, and then it becomes part of the Persian Empire. And so the rabbinic period really develops through centuries under the Persian rule, into more centuries of the Persian rule, before not the Romans, but until ultimately Arab invaders from the south come in. The 6th century, I think Muhammad conquers.
The reason I asked that particular question is because it named, in the very beginning, I haven't read.
Right, well that's what we're going to read out loud. And I want to read every word of the books out loud.
Okay.
But I want to get a lot of this stuff out there to start with. So that's the centrality of the Babylonian community. That's a rough sense of dating. And then we don't have many other historical examples. one of the things that also I think is interesting about Ezra-Nechemiah is the history of ancient Israel is the single most important thing one can learn about the ancient world if one is of Israel. Otherwise, it's mostly irrelevant. The references to ancient Israel in Egyptian writings, and the Egyptians wrote a fair bit, are very, very small. In Greek writings are very, very small. In Roman writings, most of the late Greek and early Roman writings that we have are because of Jews who are there. Philo of Alexandria, how we know about, or Josephus. And so in terms of the Jewish community in Babylon, or Jews under Persia, we have very little non-Jewish writing, and so that's the stuff that we have. But we have a fair amount of writing from the Persians. They were good administrators, which, by the way, one of the things we will see, and we'll see this especially in Nehemiah, is the rise of a scholar's class or a scribal class. And even though Ezra's thought of as a priest, we really have in kind of an East Asian sense of bureaucrats, administrators, literacy, scholars, all of those kind of lumped together for their associations. We see the rise of that group in a way that the only real place, that we really see it, which is fascinating, is in the story of Josiah and the finding of the book and the role that the scribe plays, which is very important. Read Richard Friedman, and we'll probably go back to it at some point, but I don't want to go down that road at the moment.
It's interesting that you mentioned Ezra is a priest, but his name, like Moshe Rabbeinu
Correct.
and Abraham Avinu and Ezra HaSofer.
Yeah, he's a
That's his
scribe.
name. The scribe, Ezra the scribe. That's the way he's remembered in Judaism. Ezra HaSofer.
So with all of that, and so because of that, because it's hard to play it off of history, it's hard it's hard to answer some of the questions we're going to ask about numbers, about relative sizes of the community, and even, by the way, we're gonna read the stories. There's not consensus about the dating of Ezra as to when Ezra comes back. Okay, there are those who date Ezra before Nehemiah. When I say Nehemiah, for those of you in English, I mean Nehemiah. If I say Nehemiah, then I meant Nehemiah, but I'll probably say Nehemiah. And there's a question about who came first between the two of them, and there's not a consensus. It's unclear. Part of the problem is that Persia had a Artaxerxes the first and Artaxerxes the second, and it's not clear. There's a consensus that Nehemiah returns during the reign of Artaxerxes the first, but it's not clear whether Ezra came before that or after that. We'll talk about that when we get to Nehemiah in terms of placing these things together. Yes.
So at some point you'll talk about why sometimes it's in one book.
Oh,
and
so good. The easy answer is it was traditionally seen as one book.
By
even before the rabbis, in the early biblical world.
No, I meant written by which one, or written by both, but still one book.
Oh, in terms of who wrote it. So
Nehemiah is written as a diary. So
yeah, Nehemiah is the author of it in the tradition. They get split as two separate books. And the neat thing about the book of Ezra, I don't know who's read ahead. You can read ahead. You won't spoil the class if you know the end to it. When does Ezra appear in the book of Ezra? It's really fun, by the way. If you ask, when does Isaiah appear in the book of Isaiah? When does Jeremiah appear in the book of Jeremiah? When does it first appear? When does Ezekiel first appear in the book of Ezekiel? When does Daniel first appear in the book of Daniel? Those are neat questions. We have, I think it's the 7th, or the 8th. But we have a 10-chapter book, and the namesake of the book doesn't appear
It does
until...
appear in 7.
Is it 7?
Does it? Well, it does appear in 7.
Does
I don't know if
appear,
it's
I
the
think
first
that's
time.
the first
yeah,
appearance.
Lois, that's what you said the other day.
Yeah,
You
but
mentioned-
I told you, I get the cliff notes on this one, so.
That's
These
okay.
notes are very helpful. You were right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very shortcut.
I'll
So
have to get one of those.
that's already an oddity, right? It's an oddity in the Hebrew Bible. We have a
Well, I
book.
know it's in 7.
Generally speaking, the books that have people's names, those people play the dominant role in the book. Often it's their narration or the story of their conversations with God or whatever the specifically thing. but the book of Ezra, 10-chapter book, Ezra doesn't appear till the 7th chapter. The book itself is organized in sections, and rather than laying out the outline before we start, I want to read some Bible. So let's start, and we'll see what it is. We're going to
To
start in the
anybody
order
who
that
was
it is.
worried that we're going to read Hebrew and you won't understand, most of Ezra is written in Aramaic, and you have no idea how happy I am that we're reading it in English.
Which doesn't mean we won't refer to it, but that's already, really, really important, because it's through the Persian period that we have this major change in language from whatever they spoke before. We'll say Hebrew, but
You're right.
yeah. What's really neat, by the way,
By the way, according to
Ezra, the
the
concordance.
concordance, that's the first appearance of Ezra is chapter 7.
Yeah, we just checked it.
It's
in
good
the
that
text.
Eben Shoshan agrees with
You
Lois.
read all the preceding pages?
I looked them to
I
look
thought it was
for
right.
Ezra, bevadai. It's not
Right.
that difficult.
Also, it's relevant to the one book versus two book question because it's about how it's remembered. I have, because I like the critical footnotes much better than the JPS critical footnotes, which are very, very few. I have the New Revised Standard Version, the Oxford Study Bible, which I teach from usually at State, which has wonderful introductory essays. In fact, the introductory essay for Ezra-Nechemiah is written by Tamara Cohen-Eskenazi of LA scholarly fame. Unless you haven't heard of her, then she's just of LA, not of LA scholarly fame. And in the Christian editing of these books, what we would otherwise call the Old Testament, Ezra and Nehemiah, which are historical books, come right after Chronicles. So it's really, really fun. In the Jewish Bible, in our Tanakh, Chronicles are the last books, and Ezra and Nehemiah come right before it, which is really, really neat. Now, on some level, on the level of historical books, their ordering makes more sense. Because the last verses of Chronicles, of 2nd Chronicles, is the same as the first verses of Ezra. So when you read the Old Testament, it flows. When you read the Tanakh, or you read Ketuvim, it doesn't flow. The books aren't in a historical order. Because from the end of Ezra and Nehemiah, you jump all the way back to 1st Chronicles. You jump back centuries. So the editors, the redactors, those who put the books in order, had a very different issue, a different set of issues, than those who put together the Old Testament from the same sources. So I actually want to, just to have the experience, turn to the end of the Tanakh, to 2nd Chronicles chapter 36, verse 22. Because in the telling of the story of the Tanakh, right, I'm going to give you you want the real Cliff Notes?
What?
The very end of the book of Chronicles. So it's 2nd Chronicles chapter 36.
You said 22.
Verse 22.
Oh,
But if you turn to the very
Very
end,
last chapter.
I want us to actually do it. Don't take it on faith. But I want to, very important on a conceptual level, I believe, to Ezra Nehemiah, is the 90-second story of the Tanakh that I'm about to tell you.
And you said
Okay.
36 starting where?
2nd Chronicles 36, the very end of it, starting verse 22. It's literally the last page of the Bible.
In the first year of Cyrus.
Last page of our Bible.
2023, page 2023.
All right, but here, pay attention to me for a minute. Here's the story of the 3-part Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. It starts because God makes the world. The Torah ends, we're about to get the promised land. The second part starts, we're about to get the promised land, Joshua, we actually get it. And it ends with Malachi's promise that someday it ends with Malachi. Nevi'im ends with Malachi, with the promise, which has, you can go back a little bit and see the promise of return. But the whole thing is about deliverance. It ends with Elijah the prophet on that great and awesome day of the Lord. We'll read it coming up in a couple of weeks, right before Pesach, on the great Shabbos, Shabbat HaGadol. And then Ketuvim starts with the songbook. That is what it is. But it ends with them about to enter the land. So in the eyes of those who edited the books together, each, endings matter, beginnings matter also, but endings matter. Each section of the Bible ends with the promise about to be fulfilled, and it's related to the land of Israel. So Ezra-Nechemiah, which would come after Chronicles if you put the books in historical order in terms of the flow of the story, not necessarily when they are written. Chronicles is a really hard class, so I don't know if we'll ever get there. Ezra-Nechemiah can't be at the end, because the end, Ezra-Nechemiah, is they're in the land. But there's such an exilic and promise of return mentality it is in some of the books, but in the overall ordering of the Hebrew Bible, which someplace late into the 2nd century for the ultimate final of the Hebrew Bible, of the Tanakh, and the ordering of the books, the Tanakh the way that we know it, make it that late, even though all the books are older than that, has a Gaullist mentality. We don't live in the land of Israel, but the story ends with us we're at the Jordan River with Moses, or we're waiting, the prophet of Elijah's coming any day, or Cyrus, who's no longer Cyrus, now, it's Obama, I don't know, whoever it is, it's going to give us permission, because we're not smart enough to buy our own plane tickets. But that's the organizational principle, one of the organizational principles of the whole Bible.
Which is interesting, because I assume that while they're becoming this great community, if they wanted to, they could have gone back.
Oh, so the
folks
the
in
other
Persia,
exiles in Babylon. Good. So we're going to talk about multiple communities when we read through it. We're going to talk about
Don't be so sure.
the beginning. In the beginning, we're going to talk about really two communities. There's a community that's still in the land of Israel, and there's a community in Babylon. But then we're going to end up with multiple communities, because there are those who come back, there are those who are always in Israel, there are those who don't leave, right? And different communities will be talked about and treated differently, and we'll see the character of Ezra will have different attitudes than the character of Nehemiah, right? In terms of how we treat different kinds of Jews, right? And it's really neat, by the way, because this really is a time where, and if we wanted to be really good, we can do the Persian term, because before we get to the Roman term, that'll give us into, through Latin and whatever, will give us to Yud and so forth, all of which is related to Yehudah, the name of this place, right? Not Israel. They weren't Israelites in Babylon, because the Babylonians destroyed the Judah kingdom, and they weren't Israelites under Romans. It was still thought of as part of this Judah kingdom, even though it wasn't a kingdom in Second Temple times. But the Persians, I think, are the oldest written example, other than the Bible, where this group being our ancestors, are referred to as Judeans, Judahites. That the term for Yehudah is no longer about the geography, and it's not about a kingdom, it's about the people that are related to that geography, that kingdom. Something that we might call an ethnic identity or a foreign nationality, right? Not a religious identity, though it's tied into some of those religious things, but I believe it's true that that the Persian Empire is the first written example where diaspora Jews are called Jews or Judeans, which is fascinating in terms of what does it mean, right? What does it mean? Who are the Jewish people? Who are the Jews, or who are the Judeans, to be fair, right? The better term for all of these people is some form of Judah, whether it's Judahites or Judeans or whatever it is. And I'm going to say Jews, but every time I say Jews, I mean a variant of the word Judah, which is about kingdom and geography, related in story to our patriarch, to one of Jake's boys. But the Persians are the first one to have a group of people living there who have an identity that is about a different place, different kingdom, and they call us Judeans. That's pretty significant for those of us who live in a different empire and see ourselves as connected to those same Judeans. We are Judeans. We just say Jews. And we don't know if we mean a religion or an ethnicity or some form of nationality. It's complicated in 21st century America. I guarantee we don't all understand it the same way. But the Persians are the first ones outside of ourselves to call us by that name, related to geography and monarchy, but not while we're in that geography and not under that monarchy. The Egyptians call us Israel, right? When Merneptah comes up and beats up on us, he says he beats up on Israel.
He says Israel is no more.
Exactly.
Israel is no
seed
more.
is
And the
no
first
more.
time Israel is mentioned in an
not
outside
a
source
kicker.
is Israel is no more.
Why not start at the end of the story?
Done with them.
It's like a being.
All right, Second Chronicles chapter 36, verse 22. I would like to just go around so that everybody is at least put into the spot either to read or to say pass. James, do you want to go first or last?
I'll go first.
All right, we'll just do verse by verse. Please read slowly and clearly. Again, Second Chronicles chapter 36, verse 22.
And in the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, when the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah was fulfilled, the Lord roused the spirit of King Cyrus of Persia to issue a proclamation throughout his realm by word of mouth and in writing as follows.
Okay? Now, in fairness, go home and read. Oh, you guys read it last time, right? The previous stuff.
The group, yeah, what, Jeremiah said?
No, in Second Chronicles. It's worth reading the last chapter of Second Chronicles, but I don't want to go that
Oh,
far back.
no, we didn't read
Oh,
it.
do that.
We
That's
did
part of your
not read
homework.
it.
All right. Marilyn?
Thus said King Cyrus of Persia, the Lord God of heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and has charged me with building him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Any one of you of all his people, the Lord his God will be with him, and let him go up.
Good. I don't want to talk about it here because we're about to read it again, but I wanted to read it there because there's the memory of the Edict of Cyrus, which forms the final statement of the Bible. Okay? That's the end of the Bible. Okay? Now the funny thing is, before we get to the end of the Bible, we talk about what happens after from that. Okay? But the sacred memory is that's the end of the Bible, which is pretty funky. All right, now flip over to Ezra. Anybody who has any comments they want to make? Okay.
Not a comment. I want to read just this last 6 or 7 words in Hebrew because
Okay,
they
good.
have this special. It comes back in Ezra in verse 3. The same thing, the same exact words. Doesn't matter where I read it. Yeah, there is one word, one extra word. Just listen to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 words.
Where is it?
The very last words of the
What we
what
just
you
read.
just read.
But in
I'm
the
just
Hebrew.
reading the Hebrew. Just listen
Just.
to it. מי בכם מכל עמו אדוני אלוהיו עמו ויעל. There's a strong charge in it from Cyrus. Yeah, whoever among you has God, your God, within him, go.
And it's nice acknowledging that the verb is go up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Not the first use of it we have in other
La'alot.
places, but that we have it there. All right, now let's read what we came here to read. Only 45 minutes by way of introduction is pretty good. Al, yes?
Yes.
Ezra 1:1.
Right, but I'm reading from, it doesn't matter what I'm reading from, right?
Well, I hope you read
To the
Ezra 1:1, but I
I
don't
am.
care which chapter.
Now,
1927, yes?
55.
Oh, 55. All right, sorry.
Now in the first year of Cyrus king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying. Should I go on here? Stop.
No, one verse at a time.
What?
One verse at a time. Koba?
Oh, but
Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah.
Any one of you, of all of you people, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, that is in Judah, and build the house of
Yes,
the
you're
Lord,
not sure where
God of
Jerusalem is.
Israel, and the God that is in Jerusalem.
And all who stay behind, wherever he may be living, let the people of his place assist him with silver, gold, goods, and livestock, besides the freewill offering to the house of God that is in Jerusalem.
All right, now stop. That's the end of the quotation. What's different? First of all, it's mostly the same. What's different?
The people who are
Longer.
staying there.
well, a recognition that, what changed it?
Yeah. Sorry.
Right. That there are those who will stay. And in fairness, Chronicles leaves it open. Let those who, right? It doesn't say you will all go, right? Let the Holy One among you leave.
Exactly.
But
It doesn't say anything, but it's only ones who feel God.
the
I feel the
Ezra text,
Let's get the religious nuts out of here and ship them back.
Back to the home.
Let's not make it
And the
too,
rest of you are doing too well, you know, you wanna stay here, you're
That's
making
right.
money, so contribute.
That's right. We're gonna put pushkas out.
right? So we appreciate, we can make the leap. It's hard to read. I think it's hard to read the return from Babylon without, in my mind, also being aware different times about the return from the rest of the Galut that happens, as we classically tell the story from the 19th century, middle of the 19th century forward, late 19th century. Because it's there in terms of what the parallels are, and sometimes it's sort of eerie in terms of what the parallels are, and sometimes it's sort of humorous what the parallels are, and whatever else. But it's also there for the second great return from the diaspora of the Jewish people. So that's one. Ezra acknowledges, in the way Chronicles doesn't, in terms of sort of the Zionist outlook that I stretched for the diaspora moving towards Zionist outlook that I sketched for the Hebrew Bible, Chronicles is a much better ending. Because you can't have the whole thing about fulfilling the promise and going back to the land for those who want to go, but the rest of you will stay. Yeah. So Ezra-Nechemiah acknowledges it. What else?
That they can help.
Good. That those who remain have an obligation to assist those who are returning in the rebuilding of the house. Right? So you can stay. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that they're going to give money, and I get that. But
that the connection will remain or
Good.
will be even strengthened.
Good. You don't stay here as Persians, right? Because we're not taxing the Persians to finance the Judeans going home and building God's house. You stay here, but you're still one of them, right? We actually are going to sort of tax you as part of that community. So you still have, again, I'm fascinated by the what, who, how, why is a Jew. So those who chose to stay, right? Those who choose to stay don't stay as Persians. They stay under Persian rule. They're not independent. It's not the free state of Judea in Babel. But they have a connection to these people. And that connection is such that all those in whatever place they reside be assisted by the people of their place and so forth. Besides free will offerings for the house of God. They still have an identity. Okay, we have different translations. But they still have an identity that makes a connection. Those who stay with those who are going back. Not those who stay will become Persian. All who want to go back. But if you stay, we're going to uncircumcise you or something. I don't know.
Does the first part of that last phrase mean what I thought you were saying? That the government is going to collect gold and silver to send on, which is going to be in addition to the free will offering? Or is it all just whoever wants to give?
No, it's mandatory that they do give.
Is it?
I believe so. Because even Cyrus, if you read on,
Yeah, you read on and you see that he gave
back what
all
they took.
the gold and whatever they took from Yerushalayim. At least that's
The
what Ezra
Babylonians
says.
took.
No, but that's different. Right, that's
Right.
different than
And
if
my
he's
question-
collecting
and
a
part
new
of the que-
tax, as you
yeah.
were saying,
Part of my
on the people who
question
were staying.
relates to that. We have the Cyrus whatever
Cylinder.
Is that the text of
I don't know.
the Cyrus cylinder, or is
No.
this Ezra
No.
telling us
This is Ezra.
that that's what Cyrus
Yeah,
says?
the
I don't
Cyrus.
know. I've never read the
The
Cyrus
Cyrus
thing.
cylinder, you can find
outside
it on
of
Wikipedia.
Yeah, I
And
will.
it's a Persian document, and it's written in Persian. It's not even Aramaic. By the way,
In Wikipedia.
no, in Wikipedia it's in English.
It's in English.
So
But
what does it say?
It says all captive peoples go home
Right.
if you wish.
Okay,
There will be no slavery. There will be
Okay.
no compulsion in religion
okay.
in this empire.
Does he mention anything about you have to tax yourself to help the returnees.
I'm not aware
I'll
of
check
that.
it,
I don't
because
know.
that is very Ezra-like.
Correct.
So who knows if Cyrus really
So
said that?
Correct. It is, again, you draw the parallels.
But from
It's the
Ezra point of view, it's
generation
interesting.
where those in the land of Israel say to those who are outside the land of Israel, you have an obligation to financially support us. Right? I mean, that's what it is. But what's more
But they're not
interesting to
saying
me,
it, Cyrus is saying.
Cyrus is saying, no, no,
Ezra says
Ezra
that
is saying,
Cyrus
Ezra
is
says
saying,
that.
yeah.
Or Nehemiah
I
said.
agree with you.
Exactly.
I agree with you, but I also agree with them.
Yeah.
But what I think
don't
is
know
more
when Cyrus said
interesting,
it, but I will
what,
check it.
I
what
think it was more voluntary
Well,
according to the way it reads.
well, the,
But they distinguish it
Yeah,
from
but when the
free will
king
offering.
says, yeah, but when the
What
king
is a
says
free
everybody
will
stays
offering?
give.
Food?
Also
Not exactly
repatriate.
Free will offering. What?
It's as you
Right.
In
wish.
addition,
I would
So,
add here
the-
that
It's
it
what you can
actually
afford,
goes,
what you feel.
Whatever you
it's
have.
actually God who's, you trace it back
Right.
to God who gave,
That's-
Yeah, who made Cyrus
who makes
say
Cyrus
that.
do
Ezra,
it, yeah.
Ezra
God made
gives
him do it.
Cyrus
God made him do it.
credit. You gives God credit for what Cyrus, or gives Cyrus give credit to God. I don't know how to say that in English. But so the free will offering, it doesn't say let persons voluntarily give. There is a thing called the nedeva. There is this thing that that they offer, but it's not clear to me that that makes it optional. I wouldn't translate that as an optional offering to the house.
I don't think
It says
that's,
free will. Well, I'm not arguing with the English.
but a free will offering is something else. In the early,
Correct. There are two things that are here. One is money to give to those people, and one is money to give for the offering to the house of God, which is in Jerusalem, by the way. It's kind of nice. They thought they're going to build it somewhere else.
And again, yeah, and again.
Judah.
And
So I wanna
don't
come back to
forget,
that.
don't start
But
building
what's
it
more
somewhere else.
interesting-
Yerushalayim.
What's more interesting to me
Yeah.
than the financial aspect of it is the understanding which we can put, we have choice as a reader. We can put into God, we can put into King Cyrus of Persia, or we can put into the author of the book of Ezra. I get that, but that there is a connection, a deep, meaningful connection. Those who remain are not going to be Persian. Those who remain are going to be Judeans, or Judahites, or Yudin, or I don't know, Yidden, or Jews. Right? And that's really powerful. That's really, really powerful, right? Think about it. Our ancestors came to this country, and the identity that they brought with them and passed on to us, I think, with rare exception, most of us were born on this continent. The identity that our parents or grandparents brought, or great-parents brought for us, is not Lithuanian, or Hungarian, or Polish, or Russian, depending, right? Or is not Egyptian, or is not Mexican, right? The identity that they brought, even though they were born in Lithuania and Hungary and Russia and Polish, was that they were Judeans, they were Yidden, they were Jews. And the first place where I know that happens, it happens differently in terms of the slaves in Egypt. Because sure, they could have stayed there, but they're slaves, they're not Egyptians, they're just slaves of the conquered people, whatever. Here we have free people of some form or another who have an identity that you and I have. We live in a non-Jewish place. We live in the modern-day Persia. I don't know, whatever that means. And we have an identity that our parents, who at some point, or we, at some point left the land of Israel, where our identity makes the most sense in the eyes of the tradition and the Bible and whatever else, but maintained an identity to this people and linked to this God. I don't want to make it, slowly secularized. Yeah, Bill?
In a way, that falls out of Cyrus's edict, that by saying there will be no compulsion in religion, first of all, it acknowledges that religion is something that is a little bit independent of place of residence. I mean, I think that most of the Semitic world, until that time, assumed if you were living in Ammon, Jordan, you were a believer in whatever the people there practiced.
That's why they exiled
I
people,
think
because
the big
would,
transition,
Stay home.
exactly.
the big transition, I think Karen Carpenter makes it, Karen Ohr Shalom makes it.
Karen Carpenter did a beautiful musical rendition of it, though.
Lovely.
On drums.
That's only true if you only get one God. That is, if you get multiple gods, then you can bring El or Yod Hey Vav Hey with you.
Hide them on
And
your
Marduk,
camels.
you don't have to hide them. You can put it next to Marduk up on your shelf to pay homage, or Zoroaster, or whatever the
All these
Zeruth,
empires, don't
Zeruth,
forget, they
Zeruth,
collected the
whatever.
gods.
Well,
But so the issue of that you become of the place doesn't mean you lose your other gods. And one of the issues, by the way, that we're going to deal with in terms of those who remained and those who come back and intermarry and that whole intermarriage thing is about syncretic identity. You know, because in a world where you can be an American Jew, there's no conflict, right? Because Marduk likes Thursdays and Yud Hey Vav Hey likes Saturdays, right? So you kill whatever you kill for Marduk on Thursdays, and you don't you do sacrifice on whatever, you do Musaf on Saturdays. Whatever you do. And there's no tension. It's only a problem if you can't be syncretic, right? And we are a people, and we get beat up for it throughout the Bible, who have got a problem with syncretism, with combining stuff. It's just we're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to have a problem with it. And that's going to be the issue. So I don't agree that you adopt the gods of where you are at the exclusion of what you used to have. The model in a non-monotheistic world is you adopt them along with yours. The more the
Yes,
merrier.
I can see that, but I mean, in Babylon, they were polytheistic. Over in Persepolis, they weren't. They were Zoroastrian, and they had a very particular theology that they got exclusiveness.
Correct. And what Cyrus says is you don't have to be, in fact, not only does he not say you don't have to be like us to be among us, I think he says you're not like us. Right? That's why the taxing thing makes sense.
Read the book of Esther before Haman.
Correct. So again,
Before Haman.
you need
Just
to
the
read
description.
Chronicles, you need to read Zechariah and Haggai, you
And
need to
read
read
Esther.
Esther, and you need to read,
Esther
later you're
happens
going to
during
read
this
Daniel.
period.
So it's hard to do this without having like 5 books open and to do it all together. But absolutely. After we do this, or maybe we'll pause in the middle, I mean, we're going to read Esther in 2 weeks, but in terms of in a class, we have to really do Esther then with the kind of the Persian awareness that we're going to get from this, because it's a fundamentally a different world. The last thing I want to say, and I have to be fair to my Thursdays. You should only know the scowl that I got in the office when it was made known that I now teach from 4 to 5 on Thursdays. So, you know, unless Debbie is going to repossess 4 of my children, I'm going to try to not be as liberal with time as we are on Wednesdays. In terms of class is going to end pretty close to 5. I can't do anything really on time. I want to really start at 4, and I want to try to really end at 5 because I have to go and be with the B'nai Mitzvah students on Thursday afternoon. I would say 2 things. One is this: the return is in multiple places in the Tanakh. So you looked at Jeremiah's letter. I would encourage you to look at Jeremiah 25. You will see there the reference to the Edict of Cyrus. You will see the 70 years.
Different than 29. You had said 29 earlier.
29 is the letter.
The letter is
And
in
that's where he
29:10.
mentions, that's where he mentions the 70 years. He talks about it in 25 too. In the letter, it says to them very clearly, sit for 70 years and you'll come back.
So you can see it in 29,
Their behavior.
and you can see the reference to
25:11.
the edict, 25:11 forward, and the letter's in 29. And Isaiah 45. Isaiah, Deutero-Isaiah, whole different world, whole different class. That will take us a century. If we study Isaiah the way we study text here, it would take us a century to get through the book of Isaiah. But we're going to make reference to him anyway.
Isaiah what? 45?
Isaiah 45 also, verse 13 is what my note says. My handwritten note, but that's old. Also, clearly quotes Isaiah 45, somewhere in another chapter. Quotes the Edict of Cyrus as well. So Cyrus appears in a number of places. And you can compare that text. It's less interesting to me than the end of Chronicles, because that's the, not the footnote, but that's the closing line of the Tanakh. So that's one. This understanding is often awareness of the return is critical to understanding the totality of the Tanakh, and this specific return is made reference to multiple times in Jeremiah and in Isaiah 45. I know that there were a couple of pieces that were shared and whatever else. I would encourage you. See, we'll pick up the pace. We'll get through more than 3 verses next time. We'll have far less introduction and whatnot. But I would strongly encourage, to those who are interested, there's a whole lot of material that's pretty easily accessible, from literary stuff on Ezra-Nechemiah to historical stuff. If somebody just wants to read something, you don't know what to read, come up with me in my office now or on Shabbat, and I'm happy to give you a book and say, here, you read this, because I can't read all the stuff that I have on Ezra-Nechemiah, and help us to inform the conversation. Though I want to read the text, I don't want to just argue about secondary literature related to it. There's a whole lot of stuff out there that raises all of these issues and a myriad of other issues, and we'll go from there. Any closing comments or questions?
So cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.